The ignition sequence will start at 8.9 seconds. We'll be looking to lift off at 0.
In October, President Johnson, like millions of others, tuned in on the Apollo 7 space launch from Cape Kennedy.
The purpose of the flight of Apollo 7 could be stated very simply. Prove that the spacecraft command and service modules would function properly in space, long enough to carry men to the moon and back.
The astronaut business has changed a bit, and I can't pretend to be as knowledgeable today as it was back in those days. But if you're a fighter pilot, time and time again, there are parts of every mission where it's in your hands are in your own life.
5, 4, ignition, GRR.
Commit liftoff. We have liftoff.
I'm just very, very pleased that I got to play an important part of us getting to the moon the first time. There are some serious debates about going to Mars, going back to the moon, but look how many centuries man lived on the planet Earth before he even thought about going to the moon. They don't even address some of the things we don't know how to survive yet. The radiation, the added fuel that we need, the systems that have to work perfectly for 2 years at least. So it's a much more expensive program than they really address today realistically before anybody seriously talks about landing on Mars.
And Apollo 7, Houston, how close are you now?
We're close to about 70 feet. It's tumbling rather wildly, so we're trying to stay away from it.
We're talking about the relationship between the Soviet space program and the American space program. It's been an interesting development because this isn't the only time, but NASA in the past has had another time when the only way they were going to get up there in space is depend on the Russians. NASA has started and stopped a couple of different programs, partly because of the cost, but always driven by the lack of our politicians in pushing these kind of boundaries out as it was. Now the problem is, as U.S. government agencies, as they grow in time, as they get older, they end up with less efficient operations, they're adding more people to all these things, and NASA is the same thing. We've got pieces of the organization that do a lot of things that our culture and our society thinks is a good thing to be doing, and I say, well, that's okay, but it doesn't make NASA more efficient. It decreases efficiency. Over the years, we have seen the development of interest by other countries, not to mention the fact that they want to demonstrate how good they are. And the one that's running the best at that these days is the Chinese. The competitor we have is not going to be the Russians. The competition is going to be the Chinese. Neil Armstrong was a very capable man. His office was right next door to mine, and I'll never forget the time we were just starting those vehicles to practice a lunar landing. It was before Apollo 11 flew to the moon, and I'm sitting in my office, and on the other side is my friend Alan Bean, and Alan comes over and he says, did you know that Neil almost crashed this morning? We had a failure of the vehicle. I says, no, he's in the office right next door. So we walk next door, we go in, and here's Neil. He's sitting there with his a checklist and some work he has to do in the morning. Had nothing to do with the accident. And we says, Neil, didn't you just crash? He says, oh, that was an hour ago. And he's just sitting there an hour after all of that was going on out there, and he's just working on his paperwork. Neil was a cool, fine aviator. I like the good old days. At the time, I had no idea how difficult it would be to be there. It was very satisfying when we lifted off, because we've been working for 21 months to get to that point. It was October 11th. To this day, it's almost 51 years later, Apollo 7, which was the first manned Apollo mission, that is still the longest, the most ambitious, the most successful first test flight of any new flying machine.